Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
What's up, everybody? It is Scagz here, and welcome back to the Two Doomed Men podcast. Although tonight, perhaps I'll call it the Doomed Men podcast. It's just me tonight, no captain. He's a little bit busy with a couple things going on in his life, so I am here to kind of talk to you about a couple of topics that I wanted to. I thought they were a little bit too important to just kind of let a week go by without addressing them. In the meantime, if you haven't already, you can check out our Halloween special, which was, came out on Halloween the other day. It's pretty fun. Shout out to everybody who joined us for that one. It was a good time. So let's get into it. I have two topics tonight that I kind of want to talk about. And one of them is really a bombshell report here by the Intercept. And it is regarding the Department of Homeland Security and some leaks that came out from the Department of Homeland Security. Now, if you watch the show, you might know that I am not that big of a conspiracy theorist. That's really the captain's kind of forte. But one of my biggest conspiracy theories is I think that the state, the government, the CIA, whatever you want to call them, have definitely been working together with social media companies, the big tech companies, et cetera, kind of turning them into some sort of psyop machine, in a sense similar to MK Ultra, using them to brainwash people, create narratives, create agendas, turn people into those NPCs that we're always talking about. The people who change their profile picture or whatever the current thing is, right? Like, how did that get to be? I think that there's some intelligent design behind all of that stuff. I don't think it's just a coincidence that people just support whatever narrative or agenda that the state puts forward at any moment. So the Intercept reported today, Truth Cops, leaked documents outline DHS's plan to police disinformation. This is by Ken Klippenstein and Lee Fank. It says, the Department of Homeland Security is quietly broadening its efforts to curb speech it considers dangerous. An investigation by the Intercept has found years of internal DHS memos, emails, and documents obtained via leaks and an ongoing lawsuit, as well as public documents, illustrate an expansive effort by the agency to influence tech platforms. The work, much of which remains unknown to the American public, came into clearer view earlier this year when DHS announced a new disinformation governance board. If you remember, we talked a little bit about that. That was them kind of trying to go public with this here. So these leaks have kind of now exposed that this has been going on for quite a while. A panel designed to police misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. While the board was widely ridiculed, immediately scaled back, and then shut down within a few months, other initiatives are underway at DHS as DHS pivots to monitor social media now that its original mandate, the war on terror, has been wound down. So what do they mean there exactly? I guess they're trying to say that the Department of Homeland Security's original mandate in this regard to try and police misinformation, like their mandate or their legitimacy came from the war on terror, which is something I hope conservatives have learned a lesson about. The Patriot Act, those are all things enacted by Republicans and, as you can see now, have been turned around and pointed back at conservatives and people on the right. Like those tools that they created and gave to government have now been used against those very same people. So I'm going to continue here. Behind closed doors and through pressure on private platforms, the U.S. government has used its power to try and shape online discourse. According to a meeting minutes and other records appealed to a lawsuit filed by Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, a Republican who is also running for Senate, discussions have ranged from the scale and scope of government intervention in online discourse to the mechanics of streamlining takedown requests for false or intentionally misleading information. Platforms have got to get comfortable with government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain. Microsoft executive Matt Masterson a former DHS official texted Jen Easterly, a DHS director, in February. In a March meeting, Laura Demlow, an FBI official, warned that the threat of subversive information on social media could undermine support for the U.S. government. No shit. I mean, that's essentially what like the Two Doom Men podcast is based around, undermining the U.S. government. I think that whole idea, or they're so full of themselves, you know. I guess you could say like the promise of America, like there nowhere does it say you can't question government or the legitimacy of government. That's kind of like what our entire society here is founded upon. Yet these government agencies are so, they clutch their pearls at the thought of people undermining or questioning the legitimacy of government. Really just bizarre. Demlow, according to notes of the discussion attended by senior executives from Twitter and JP Morgan Chase, stressed that we need a media infrastructure that is held accountable. We do not coordinate with other entities when making content moderation decisions, and we independently evaluate content in line with the Twitter rules, a spokesperson for Twitter wrote in a statement to The Intercept. That's pretty much directly contradicting what The Intercept finds out here. There is also a formalized process for government officials to directly flag content on Facebook or Instagram and request that it be throttled or suppressed through a special Facebook portal that requires a government or law enforcement email to use. At the time of writing, the content request system at facebook.com/xtakedowns/login is still live. I can actually go to it right now. It is still live. It is facebook.com/xtakedowns/logins. And you can, submit a request to take down, content on Facebook here. I guess if you have a police or government email. This is just hysterical, thinking back and looking back, especially to the days of the pandemic, where people were starting to question mandates and lockdowns and, the talk around the vaccine and stuff like that. You were called a conspiracy theorist. You were, you might have had your Twitter account banned, your Facebook account banned, or throttled, shadow banned, kind of like we had happen to our Instagram account. And a lot of people on the left at the time, they said, hey, it's a private company. All of a sudden, they became libertarians, the left. It's a private company and they could do what they want. If they don't like what you're saying on their platform, it's their platform, so they could do whatever they want. And, a lot of people saw through that it's obviously bullshit. Some of the old school libertarians, I guess they wanted to make the argument that, no, it is a private platform. But a lot of people saw right through this, including myself, including the captain. And we realized, no, it's they're working together with government. It's not a private company if the government is working together with them and like giving them edicts, telling them what to do. That is not a private company. That's like a proxy arm of government. And it's actually pretty, ingenious, honestly, because it's almost like you bake into the cake some sort of out for government censorship and propaganda. It's not us. It's just a private company. And you keep all that stuff hidden like they did here. Let's keep reading from the story here. All right. So DHS and Meta, the parent company of Facebook, did not respond to a request for comment. The FBI also declined to comment. Homeland Security's mission to fight disinformation stemming from concerns around Russian influence in the 2016 presidential election began taking shape during the 2020 election over efforts to shape discussions around vaccine policy during the coronavirus pandemic. What did I just say? Documents collected by The Intercept from a variety of sources, including current officials and publicly available reports, reveal the evolution of more active measures by DHS. According to a draft copy of DHS's Quadrennial Homeland Security Review, DHS's capstone report outlining the department's strategy and priorities in the coming years, the department plans to target inaccurate information on a wide range of topics, including the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines, racial justice, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of U.S. support to Ukraine. Some of just the most hot button issues in political discourse nowadays. They want to control the narrative, is what essentially what they're saying. The Department of Homeland Security is saying this. It's not some crackpot idea that's coming from some, crazy person online. This is coming from the Department of Homeland Security. And going back to what I originally started with, I always thought that this PSYOP shit would always eventually come back to war. And look, it tells you right here, around the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, the nature of U.S. support to Ukraine. I mean, war and propaganda have always gone together. War and censorship have always gone together. So it shouldn't be that much of a going out on a limb to believe that this is what the state would try and do. Try and craft the narrative and, throw people in jail, or at least Twitter jail, Facebook jail, for speaking out against the war. Back in, World War I, World War II, there were anti-war protesters, and, FDR was famous for, putting them in jail and, really persecuting people who spoke out against the war. So it's not new, honestly. All right, let me continue here. So the challenge is particularly acute in marginalized communities, the report states, which are often targets of false or misleading information, such as false information on voting procedures targeting people of color. The inclusion of the 2021 U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan is particularly noteworthy, given that House Republicans, should they take the majority in the midterms, have vowed to investigate. This makes Benghazi look like a much smaller issue, said Rep. Mike Johnson, a member of the Armed Services Committee, adding that finding answers will be a top priority. How disinformation is defined by the government has not been clearly articulated, and the inherently subjective nature of what constitutes disinformation provides a broad opening for DHS officials to make politically motivated determinations about what constitutes dangerous speech. That's 100% true. Who's to say what disinformation is? I mean, who's the arbiter of truth? The government? Of course, they're going to legislate or arbitrate every scenario about something someone doesn't says that they don't like. Of course, they're going to say that it's disinformation. That's just the nature of it, right? I guess you would too if you were the government. DHS justifies these goals, which have expanded far beyond its original purview on foreign threats to encompass disinformation originating domestically, by claiming that terrorist threats can be exacerbated by misinformation and disinformation spread online. But the laudable goal of protecting Americans from danger has often been used to conceal political maneuvering. They're going to give you a good example here. In 2004, for instance, the Department of Homeland Security officials faced pressure from the George W. Bush administration to heighten the national threat level for terrorism in a bid to influence voters prior to the election. According to former DHS Secretary Tom Ridge, U.S. officials have routinely lied about an array of issues, from the causes of its wars in Vietnam and Iraq to their more recent obfuscation around the role of the National Institutes of Health in funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology's coronavirus research. That track record has not prevented the U.S. government from seeking to become arbiters of what constitutes false or dangerous information on inherently political topics. Earlier this year, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a law known by supporters as the Stop Woke Act, which bans private employers from workplace trainings asserting an individual's moral character is privileged or oppressed based on his or her race, color, sex, or national origin. The law, critics charged, amounted to a broad suppression of speech deemed offensive. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, has since filed a lawsuit against DeSantis alleging unconstitutional censorship. A federal judge temporarily blocked parts of the Stop Woke Act, ruling that the law had violated workers' First Amendment rights. Florida's legislators may well find plaintiffs' speech repugnant, but under our constitutional scheme, the remedy for repugnant speech is more speech, not enforced silence, wrote Judge Mark Walker, and in a colorful opinion castigating the law. The extent to which the DHS initiatives affect Americans' daily social feed is unclear. This is my big thing. I think that these government programs, these algorithms especially, they are affecting your feeds tremendously every single day. They are curating what you see. They are trying to push certain viewpoints onto you, or they're even trying to make perhaps certain political opinions or agendas appear to be more popular than they actually are, to give them legitimacy. Like, let's use for an example, democratic socialism or something like that. They want to make it seem like that is a really popular point of view to give it legitimacy. This way they can push that later in agenda. So during the 2020 election, the government flagged numerous posts as suspicious, many of which were then taken down. Documents cited in the Missouri Attorney General's lawsuit disclosed. And a 2021 report by the Election Integrity Partnership at Stanford University found that of nearly 48,000 flagged items, technology platforms took action on 35%, either removing, labeling, or soft blocking speech, meaning the users were only able to view content after bypassing a warning screen. The research was done in consultation with CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Prior to the 2020 election, tech companies including Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Discord, Wikipedia, Microsoft, LinkedIn, Verizon Media met on a monthly basis with the FBI, CISA, and other government representatives. According to NBC News, the meetings were part of initiatives still ongoing between the private sector and government to discuss how firms would handle misinformation during the election. Okay. Let's skip ahead here a little bit. This is a really in-depth, long article done by the Intercept here. I really suggest people go and read it. I'm not going to read the entire thing here, although Captain's not here to complain about me reading, so I can read a little bit more. But go to theintercept.com, and the article is right there. I'm going to pick up here at this next part. They start talking about Twitter, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this has all come out and kind of occurred the week after Elon Musk has officially closed a deal on Twitter. Elon is now at Twitter HQ working. He's fired the old guard that was in charge there. So I don't think any of this is a coincidence, and we'll kind of get into Twitter a little bit more here in the future of this article. So emails between DHS officials, Twitter, and the Center for Internet Security outlined the process for such takedown requests during the period leading up to the November 2020 election. Meeting notes show that the tech platforms would be called upon to process reports and provide timely responses, to include the removal of reported misinformation from the platform where possible. In practice, this often meant state election officials sent examples of potential forms of disinformation to CISA, which would then forward them on to social media companies for a response. Again, I'm going to repeat that. In practice, this often meant state election officials sent examples of potential forms of disinformation to CISA. CISA is the agency kind of that's within the umbrella, I guess you could say, of the Department of Homeland Security. CISA would then forward them on to social media companies for a response. They are telling social media companies what disinformation is going to look like. Mark Zuckerberg didn't even hide this. He was told by the FBI to be on the lookout for Russian disinformation, about the 2020 election, which led to, or according to him, I'm not going to take his word for it or anything, but according to him, was, what led to them censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story. Again, this is not behavior of a private company. It's not a private company if they're taking orders and following directives from the government. It's just an elaborate ruse. It's just an elaborate marketing scheme to make it appear like it's a private company, or some sort of justification so they could then come around and be like, no, we're not, censoring speech. We're not telling people what to do. It's a private company. It's them. It's their policies. You don't like the policies? Make your own Twitter. Make your own Facebook. All right. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting. Go on to the Biden administration and their role here. Under President Joe Biden, the shifting focus on disinformation has continued. In January 2021, CISA replaced the Countering Foreign Influence Task Force with the Misinformation, Disinformation, and Malinformation team. these are like mouthfuls. These teams, these agencies they have. Usually the government will like abbreviate everything. Okay, so this team, which was created to promote more flexibility to focus on MDM, I guess, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. But now the scope of the effort had expanded beyond disinformation produced by foreign governments to include domestic versions. The MDM team, according to one CISA official quoted in the IG report, counters all types of disinformation to be responsive to current events. There you have it. So now it's not even specific events. Like I guess you could say, like they were talking about earlier, COVID-19 or the pullout of Afghanistan. They just want to be responsive to current events. So any news story that comes out, anything that could possibly question or counter the government's official narrative, they want to make sure that they're able to be responsive to something like that. All right. Let's see. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit more here. In June, the same DHS Advisory Committee of CISA, which includes Twitter head of legal, the same DHS Advisory Committee of CISA, which includes Twitter head of legal policy, trust, and safety, Vijaya Gadi, and University of Washington professor Kate Starberg, drafted a report to the CISA director calling for an expansive role for the agency in shaping the information ecosystem. Now, remember, late last week, Vijaya Gadi was fired from Twitter from Elon Musk. This is what I was alluding to before. I don't think any of this is a coincidence that she gets fired. Her name is now in a report by the Intercept, her having communications with the Department of Homeland Security, where she is essentially, let's see, it says, that they're calling for an expansive role for the agency in shaping the information ecosystem. The report called on the agency to closely monitor social media platforms of all sizes, mainstream media, cable news, hyper-partisan media, talk radio, and other online resources. They argued that the agency needed to take steps to halt the spread of false and misleading information, with a focus on information that undermines key democratic institutions, such as the courts, or by other sectors, such as the financial system or public health measures. Isn't that funny? With a focus on information that undermines key democratic institutions. You speaking your mind, you making a political podcast on Facebook and talking, participating in the democratic process of free speech, that can undermine key democratic institutions. That's what these people are saying or advocating for. To accomplish these broad goals, the report said CISA should invest in external research to evaluate the efficacy of interventions, specifically with research looking at how alleged disinformation can be countered and how quickly messages spread. Jeff Hale, the director of Election Security Initiative at CISA, recommended the use of third-party information sharing nonprofits as a clearinghouse for information to avoid the appearance of government propaganda. Let me read that one back one more time. Jeff Hale, the director of the Election Security Initiative at CISA. So Jeff Hale, I guess he's in charge of the Election Security Initiative at CISA. CISA is under, again, the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security. He recommended the use of third-party information sharing nonprofits as a clearinghouse for information to avoid the appearance of government propaganda. So what's Jeff Hale talking about here exactly when he says third-party information sharing nonprofits? Well, he's talking about fact checkers, right? And what does he mean by clearinghouse for information to avoid the appearance of government propaganda? He means they need a way to launder their government propaganda. They don't want it to appear outright that they're just putting out government propaganda. They want it to appear legit. They want it to appear like it's coming from a third party. And he says it right here. He recommended the use of third-party information sharing nonprofits as a clearinghouse for information to avoid the appearance of government propaganda. If you weren't out there trying to put government propaganda on social media and influence people what to think, then why would you be concerned about it appearing to look like government propaganda? Again, I feel somewhat vindicated here in my crazy conspiracy theory because this shit is all true. The government is out there using social media to reinforce their narrative and tell you what to think or what to write, what is right. Literally, fact checking. They're telling you what is right. They're checking the facts, but they're the ones coming out there and making that decision under the guise of it's not them, it's some third-party agency. Last Thursday, immediately following billionaire Elon Musk's completed acquisition of Twitter, Gade was terminated from the company. So I marked it there. I think there might be one more part of this I wanted to read. There was a really funny part, actually, where they highlighted an example of a post on Twitter that leaked that they were trying to censor or look into. Yeah, here it is right here. So during the 2020 election, the Department of Homeland Security, in an email to an official at Twitter, forwarded information about a potential threat to critical U.S. infrastructure, citing FBI warnings. In this case, about an account that could imperil election system integrity. The Twitter user in question had 56 followers, along with a bio that read, DM us your weed store locations. Hoes be mad, but this is a parody account. Under a banner image of Lucifer, the 32-foot tall demonic horse sculpture featured at the entrance of the Denver International Airport. We are not sure if there's any action that can be taken, but we wanted to flag them for consideration, wrote a state official on the email thread, forwarding on other examples of accounts that could be confused with official government entities. The Twitter representative responded, "We will escalate. Thank you." So, I mean, I don't know. What exactly are they talking about? Like, what is that account? It seems like some stupid troll account, and they're out here trying to censor or silence some stupid troll account that's talking about weed stores and hoes be mad, but this is a parody account right in the Twitter handle. I mean, does that mean that you can't post stuff? No, but it's just wild. That these direct examples of censorship are coming out now, and how just bizarre and stupid that really is. So there you have it. I don't know how much more of a smoking gun you're going to get than something like this. Again, this is not the Two Doom Men or some like sloppy show or journalist report. This is the Intercept, right? I'm just providing the information to you. The power of these social media companies is something I don't think most people realize or thought was going to be the case. They have the capability to influence thought, to influence people's thoughts, to craft narratives, to change your opinion on things. I'm not saying that's necessarily even a bad thing. My opinion on things has changed from reading other people's opinions or other people making better arguments. But I think when it comes in terms to the government and controlling a narrative or interjecting itself into someone making an opinion or an argument or a point and being like, no, that person's wrong because we said so. And we need to remove that person, deplatform that person. And anyone who agrees with this is a terrorist or whatever. I don't, that's not obviously something that should ever occur in America. We have the freedom of speech. Thankfully, the ACLU has actually come out and, after the fact with this article and made a statement, condemning this as like infringement on freedom of speech. They've been pretty lame lately, the ACLU, but at least, here they are finally saying something about it. It's not something we should accept. It's not something that should occur in a democracy. And it's just ironic coming from the people who every fucking day on the news, on their Twitter accounts and wherever are crying about threats to our democracy over and over again. This is dangerous to our democracy. Yet they're there stifling the process of democracy and freedom of speech. It really is something, and I really hope people understand what's going on here. These are hardcore authoritarians with a new marketing strategy. It's not the old school fascists of the 30s and the 40s who were like outright authoritarians. You know, the Stalins, the Hitlers, who you knew what they were, no matter what. You knew they were dictators. You knew they were authoritarians. This is a new form, a new method, right? They are presenting themselves as, you know, some sort of, you know, social justice warriors that are there just to protect you from terrorism and whatnot. And believe me, it's not. It's not. It's just a new tactic. It's a new strategy, and it's a good one. It is a good one. I really have to say this. Something I've talked about with people a lot. It's evolved. You know, they've learned. They've done their work in history, and outright being the bad guy, outright being the authoritarian, not a good idea because people find you out right away. You need to convince people to beg, you know, beg for the chains, beg for the censorship. So I think that's just something everyone should be aware of. You know, we're about a week away now from the midterm elections. You know, I'm not someone who necessarily believes that or just buys the whole rigged election narrative that was out there from, you know, the MAGA people and from Trump. So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm just going to encourage everybody to go vote. It is a low cost action that you can do. It's, you know, an hour. You take some time out of your day, one day every couple of years. You go there and you check a fucking box. It doesn't cost you much in terms of money and time. Go and do it, and let's see what happens. And if there's some funny business this time around again, perhaps I'll think a little bit differently about the role of the elections and in government. So there's a second article and a second scenario that I kind of wanted to talk about today. And it's going back to the war in Ukraine. And it turns out that there are U.S. military boots on the ground in Ukraine. And I have a story here from antiwar.com in regards to it. And it says the U.S. military is conducting on-site weapons inspections inside Ukraine. The inspections are being conducted by U.S. military personnel based at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. A Pentagon official told reporters on Monday that U.S. military personnel have recently begun on-site inspections of U.S.-provided weapons inside Ukraine, confirming a small U.S. military presence on the ground. U.S. personnel have recently resumed on-site inspections to assess weapon stocks in country whenever and wherever the security conditions allow, the Pentagon official said, speaking on the condition of anonymity. The official said that the return of a defense attaché and an Office of Defense Cooperation personnel to Ukraine has enabled the inspections. Both the defense attaché and Office of Defense Cooperation personnel are based at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. Defense attaches are military officers stationed at U.S. embassies that represent the Pentagon's interests in the country. The Ukrainian government had previously said that the defense attaché, Brigadier General Garrick M. Harmon, arrived in the country back in August. According to the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv's website, the Office of Defense Cooperation partners with Ukraine Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces to provide military equipment, training, familiarization events, and educational opportunities in order to support the modernization of Ukraine's military and bilateral foreign policy objectives, while engaging at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels. The Pentagon official did not offer any details about where the on-site inspections are taking place. Pretty smart. I don't think we would want that to be public knowledge. In terms of the inspections, I'm not going to get into specific details on locations of where these inspections have taken place, the official said. According to the Associated Press, the inspections are part of a broader State Department initiative to ensure weapons sent to Ukraine don't end up in Russia's hands or on the black market. But there has been virtually no oversight up to this point, and Finnish authorities said this week that criminal gangs are smuggling arms that have been sent to Ukraine. Surprise. The weapons inspectors based at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv is the only U.S. military presence inside Ukraine that has been confirmed by Washington and demonstrates the U.S. growing involvement in the war. The Intercept recently reported that U.S. Special Operations Forces and CIA personnel are also inside the country, but the U.S. hasn't officially acknowledged the covert campaign. So there you have it, folks. There are U.S. soldiers to some capacity on the ground, boots on the ground in Ukraine. Why should you care? Why is this dangerous? Look, it's a war, and it's a war between Ukraine and Russia, and it's a proxy war of ours. If some of these U.S. military personnel or soldiers are caught up in let's say a guided missile attack, and they're blown up, and the attack comes from Russia, there's going to be calls to war with Russia. Is that something that if we want to get into? We want to get into a direct hot conflict with Russia over the Donbass region in Ukraine. I mean, it's reckless, it's stupid, and it's now acknowledged. At least the CIA and the covert ops is like one of those deniable assets, right? So if they get killed or blown up, oh, no, we don't know anything about that. There's deniability there, and you could then use that to not have the thing spin into like a larger conflict. But now you have acknowledged presence on the ground. It's really just insane. And it's also funny thinking back to one of the recent weapons or military aid packages that Congress passed, sent to Ukraine. I think this was back at sometime in August. Rand Paul had tried to hold up the bill because he had proposed essentially like an auditor or something like that be sent with the aid and the weapons to Ukraine. And I think the guy he proposed was the same guy who was in charge kind of the whole Afghanistan operation. And he got chewed out, Rand Paul. He got shot down by the rest of Congress who thought it was unnecessary. It was insane. That he was being a partisan hack. They was just trying to hold up the defense of Ukraine or whatever. But here you have it. They have soldiers on the ground there to check in on military weaponry that they sent into Ukraine. So instead of having an auditor just in charge of the funds and trying to see where the funds are going, I mean, they've, I guess, put some sort of auditing on the ground there, but it's an auditor that's like on the battlefield and could theoretically be killed and drag us into a war with Russia. So it's, they come up with auditing, but it's in the even more dangerous, worse aspect of auditing. Like they somehow come up with auditing and they make it even worse. And it really is just bizarre. And if you said, that there was boots on the ground, just like with misinformation said before, if you claimed any of this stuff, you were misinformation, you were disinformation. So again, why should the government get to control, speech and discourse around these certain things? They shouldn't, right? Because most of the times they're lying or they have an agenda. In this regard, it's just the craziest one because it's one that could lead to nuclear war. So I thought those were the two most important topics of the week. Obviously, Nancy Pelosi and her husband, he got attacked at his house. I think I'll save that one for the captain because it's something to maybe laugh about there. But I got one more segment before we go here tonight, and I'm still going to do tweets of the week. And there is no captain today, but he will be joining us, theoretically, at least in some way, because he did provide a tweet of the week this week, even though he is not here. Let's start off with one of mine first. And I'm going to Richard Hananiah. And he said, and he's replying to @Demosthenes, he goes, "Those are racist blacks, traitors to their own. Ask any expert in African American studies." What is he talking about exactly? If you scroll up, he's saying, so someone says to him, "I assume you're an ally of Clarence Thomas or Myra Flores or Thomas Sowell, or only those who align with your ideology." To that, Richard and I is saying, "Those are racist blacks, traitors to their own. Ask any expert in African American studies." Richard Hanai is a white guy who portrays himself as some sort of ally to minorities, at the same time calling other minorities racist blacks because they have an independent thought. Thomas Sowell is one of like the most, brilliant minds of our time, is a racist black because he doesn't toe the line. Just like this person is saying, or only those who align with your ideology. So it doesn't matter what you look like. If you have a critical thought, if you're your own person, you are racist. It doesn't even matter if you're black or Latino or whatever. Let's go over to the captain's tweet this week, see what he had to pick out. And this is from Rob Reiner, who is I don't know at this point what Rob Reiner is. I mean, grifter, tremendous shit lib, really, lacking any sort of knowledge in economic policy in any way whatsoever. So Rob Reiner goes, Donald Trump has been spreading the big lie for 2 years. The violent assault on Paul Pelosi and the attempt to murder Speaker Pelosi is directly related to that lie. Donald Trump is 100% responsible for this and January 6th. He must be indicted and never be allowed to hold office. Isn't that crazy? I mean, Donald Trump is responsible for this person breaking into Nancy Pelosi's house and trying to kill her and Paul Pelosi. Imagine trying to pin the actions of some random, crazed, deranged individual on your political opponent. All right. I mean, we could sit here all day and do that. We could sit here all day and, play that game about the Antifa riots, about the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020. It's just insane to even have an opinion like this. People are crazy. People do crazy things. It's just bizarre to see. I mean, I guess it's really not bizarre, but people like this are just straight up grifting on topics like this. I mean, like, is that even a real opinion? I guess me and Chris talk about stuff like this all the time. It doesn't even appear to be a clear opinion. It's just like the craziest, most inauthentic thing to say, and you say it because it's going to get a response. Like idiots like me are going to talk about it on their show, or you're going to get ratioed or whatever. I mean, he's got 106,000 likes. That's pretty bizarre. All right, let's go over to my next tweet, which is from the Redheaded Libertarian. I really like her account. She's pretty funny and pretty insightful sometimes. And she goes, all these congressmen preaching against hammer attacks while preparing to nuke Russia. And again, we're going to go into the whole Paul Pelosi thing probably with the captain. But yeah, everybody in Congress was denouncing, this horrific act of violence against Paul Pelosi, getting hit in the head by a hammer by some intruder. But these same people are, playing nuclear chicken with Russia, something that could vaporize the entire planet. And then my last tweet of the week comes from, I'm sorry if I can't pronounce the name, but it comes from Val Vashveka. She is Ukrainian. Just to give you some context here, she is a Ukrainian activist and organizer. And she says, why do some Americans think that they're so special and unique that we have an obligation to prove anything to them / convince them? Self-obsessed and selfish much? I'm sorry, but the world doesn't revolve around you. At this point in the war in Ukraine, I'm pretty sure about $80 billion plus in funds and weapons have been sent to Ukraine. That's your money, right? That's your tax dollars to one extent or another. I mean, most of it's getting printed by the Federal Reserve, so it doesn't really exist. But to one extent or another, that devalues your currency. It's your money that's being sent over to them. And to have that sort of opinion, that was actually in response to Brianna Greyjoy, who is a commentator, podcaster on the left, who was being a little bit critical about a scenario in Ukraine. But to say that we can't question, we can't have an opinion on the war or what's going on in the war, or that we have to just take any Ukrainian's word for it, is fucking insane. I commented on that and I'm like, okay, great. I'll take my $80 billion back then. We had no say in that money going over to Ukraine as individuals. At the very fucking least, we get to comment and give our opinions on the war. That's just one person in Ukraine. I'm not going to let her speak for all Ukrainians, but it is really just bizarre to think about and look at their behavior. I guess they are under attack. So they're quite emotional, but it'll be interesting to see a couple of years in the future, going back and looking at this, see what our relationship with Ukraine will be like. I don't know if it's going to be a healthy, fruitful relationship, but remains to be seen. So I think that's it. This is my first go around of trying to do the podcast on my own, try and give you guys something to listen to this week. Not exactly my forte. I am more of a conversationalist, but I think I did actually a pretty decent job. I normally like to bounce my ideas off of someone like the captain and then hear his, what he has to say or just be up in a conversation. So I guess I'm kind of bouncing my ideas and thoughts off of you guys, reading you guys a little bit of news this week. So if you like it, leave us a comment below, share the show. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to check out the Patriot Podcast Network on Roku. And don't forget to check out one of our sponsors, mypatriotcigars.com, and use promo code DOOMED for 15% off of your purchase. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a good week. Peace.